Ready for a deep dive into a life, well, a life that takes some wild turns. We're going to be looking into Louise Peete today.
Louise Peete.
Yeah, a convicted murderer. And
Oh, wow.
her story, it's full of twists and turns, let me tell you.
I'm always intrigued by, how a life can go from seemingly ordinary to a string of serious crimes.
Right.
Like, what leads someone down such a drastically different path, right? So I think this deep dive is going to be pretty interesting.
I think so, too. And you sent us a pretty hefty PDF on her. I mean, we got mugshots, we got dates, we got locations.
Oh, wow.
Even her full Wikipedia article is in here.
That's thorough.
Yeah, so there's some suspicious deaths connected to her. What are your initial thoughts just looking at all this material?
I mean, right off the bat, the sheer number of deaths that's pretty striking.
Yeah.
Really raises questions, doesn't it? About coincidence and, could there be a pattern of manipulation going on here?
Right.
It's hard to say at this point, but it definitely piques my curiosity.
Yeah, well, let's start with Louise's early life, okay? She was born Lofi Louise Preslar in Louisiana in 1880
Okay.
to a wealthy, pretty prominent family.
Mm.
You'd think, right? You would think a privileged upbringing like that would lead to a completely different path.
You would think it really makes you wonder what factors contribute to someone deviating so drastically from what their life, seems to be set on, right?
Yeah.
Was there something in her personality, her environment, or maybe both? A combination?
And there were some signs of trouble pretty early on, too.
Oh,
She was expelled from a private school
a private school.
at 15
Wow, okay.
for stealing and what the sources call promiscuous behavior.
Well, I mean, that expulsion, that kind of suggests maybe like a rebellious streak, a disregard maybe for those societal norms,
Yeah.
even at a young age, right? Makes you think about the psychology of transgression. Was this an early indication, that she wanted to break the rules, to live outside the confines of what was expected of her?
Right, and then we jump into her marriages, and that's when this whole suspicious death thing really starts. Her first husband, Henry Bosley, he was a traveling salesman. He commits suicide 4 years after they marry.
4 years in?
Yeah, and it was when he found Louise with another man.
Oh, so that's our first encounter with this, this pattern of death surrounding Louise.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty hard to ignore, especially given the circumstances, right? Of course, correlation doesn't equal causation, but it definitely gets you thinking.
Definitely piques the curiosity, right?
Absolutely.
So after Bosley's death, she moves, relocates to Shreveport, becomes a high-class prostitute,
Okay.
and starts stealing from her clients.
Wow, it's like she's constantly reinventing herself, adopting all these different personas to get what she wants.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, but also kind of troubling.
It is troubling, and then by 1911, she's in Boston, going by Louise Gold now,
Okay.
constructs this whole persona as a 19-year-old heiress, living extravagantly on credit, stealing money, the whole 9 yards. She even managed to fool the grand jury after oil baron Joe Appel is found dead in Waco, Texas.
Wait, she fooled a grand jury?
Yeah.
So for our listeners who might not know, a grand jury is a group of citizens that decide if there's enough evidence to charge someone with a crime, right?
Right.
She managed to convince them.
She did.
That is really interesting. It really speaks to her ability to manipulate, to convince others that she's innocent even when there's evidence stacking up against her.
Yeah.
That's a skill, and that's a skill that, would serve her well throughout her life.
And then, not too long after that, 1913, she marries Harry Farote,
Okay.
a night clerk in Dallas. She steals $20,000 worth of jewels.
$20,000 back then.
Back then, yeah.
That's a fortune.
Big fortune. Her husband gets cleared,
Okay.
and then Farote commits suicide.
Wow. I mean, is this all just a string of unfortunate coincidences,
Yeah.
or is there something more, something more sinister going on?
Right.
3 men connected to Louise, they all die under questionable circumstances. It's hard to write that off as just bad luck, isn't it?
It is.
It begs the question, was she directly involved? Or did she just have this knack for attracting chaos and tragedy?
Yeah, good question.
It's hard to say for sure at this point, but it's definitely something to consider as we go deeper into her story.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll delve into what might be her most infamous crime, the murder of Jacob Denton.
Oh, this is getting good.
And that takes us to, I guess you could say, maybe her most infamous crime, the murder of Jacob Denton. So by this time, Louise is married to Richard Peete.
Okay.
They even have a daughter together, but they're separated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Louise relocates to Los Angeles,
Uh-huh.
and she meets Jacob Denton, a wealthy, widowed mining engineer.
Okay.
So what happens next?
Well, Louise ends up renting Denton's mansion
Oh, yeah?
for a ridiculously low price, like $75 a month.
$75?
For a 14-room Tudor revival. It's almost like too good to be true, you know?
Yeah, that is suspicious for sure. Did she target him because he was a recent widower? Maybe she saw, like, an opportunity, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, widows and widowers, they're often, in a state of emotional turmoil.
Sure.
Makes them potentially easier to manipulate. And we already know, right, that Louise is, well, she's good at that.
Right. It's got a knack for it. So
Exactly.
just a week after she moves in, Denton vanishes
Just like that.
without a trace.
And just like before with the other suspicious death, right, Louise starts spinning this web of lies.
Mm.
To explain his absence, she's telling people he's injured or he's too ashamed to show his face.
Okay.
Or even that he's run off with another woman. The whole works.
But meanwhile, she's living in his mansion,
Right.
spending his money, forging checks, the whole 9 yards.
It's a pattern, isn't it?
It is. It's a pattern we've seen before.
It's not just reacting to circumstances at this point.
Yeah.
It feels more like a calculated approach.
Yeah, methodical, almost.
Yeah, like a deliberate method of deception. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And we can't forget about the gardener she hired
Oh, right. The
to
gardener.
deliver a truckload of dirt.
A whole truckload. What was it for, she said?
Mushroom cultivation, she said.
Mushroom cultivation.
Yeah, but we know that she had, well, much more sinister plans for that dirt.
That detail, that's chilling, It suggests premeditation, like she was already planning for Denton's demise while pretending everything was normal.
Right.
It's a pretty disturbing thought.
It is. And for months, she keeps up this charade until, in September 1920, Denton's body is finally discovered, buried in the basement.
Buried in the basement?
He had been shot, strangled, wrapped in a quilt. The evidence leads straight to Louise.
A gruesome discovery, really. The one that finally, the one that catches up to her.
Right.
But even during the trial, even then, Louise is sticking to her story.
Really?
Claiming that the body's not Denton's, that someone else must have killed him.
Oh.
It's incredible.
So she never admits guilt,
Nope.
even when faced with, overwhelming evidence.
It makes you wonder, was she delusional? Or was this just like a desperate attempt to hold on to some shred of dignity?
Right.
Or maybe she truly believed she was above the law.
Yeah, it's a question that definitely lingers.
Definitely does.
So the jury, of course, they see through her lies. And in 1921, she is convicted of first-degree murder.
Wow.
And sentenced to life prison.
Life in prison.
You'd think that would be the end of the story, right?
You would think so, right?
But Louise Peete, well, she had this knack for defying expectations.
That she did.
In 1939, after serving 18 years, she's paroled for good behavior.
Oh, wow.
She convinced the parole board that she was a changed woman.
I mean, it seems unbelievable, doesn't it?
It does.
Someone with her history, all that deception to be granted parole.
Yeah.
It really speaks to her manipulative abilities,
It does. Like she's presenting this carefully constructed facade.
Right. And, she was, by all accounts, like a model prisoner, worked as a dental assistant, tended the prison garden.
Oh, wow.
Even wrote for the prison newspaper.
Really?
Yeah. It's kind of hard to believe.
So maybe she really did want to change her life, or maybe she was just played the long game.
Yeah.
Just patiently waiting for an opportunity to get her freedom back.
It's a question that keeps coming up, with people who study her case. Was there any real remorse? Or was it all just an act?
To get out of prison.
To secure their release?
And then after she's released, the suspicious deaths start happening again.
Again? Oh, no.
2 women who vouched for her.
Oh, the women who helped her.
Offered her a place to stay. Jessie Marcy and Emily Latham. They died shortly after Louise moved in with them.
Wow, you're kidding.
No.
And their deaths were never investigated?
Not thoroughly, no. And Louise, she had changed her name at this point to Anna Lee.
Anna Lee.
Yeah, she managed to slip back into obscurity.
So she got away with it again.
I mean, we can't say for sure if she was involved in their deaths, but
the timing is definitely suspicious.
it is very suspicious.
Yeah.
And then there's the murder of Margaret Logan in 1944.
Margaret Logan.
Right.
Okay, so this is the case that finally, brings Louise down.
It does.
She had met Margaret in prison.
Oh, okay.
And after Louise was released, she moved in with Margaret and her husband, Arthur, who had dementia.
Uh-huh.
Louise became their caretaker.
Oh, okay.
But it wasn't long before she went back to her old ways.
Manipulating and deceiving.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
she's living with the Logans, and then she marries a banker?
Yep, a banker and Lee Borden Judson.
And doesn't tell him anything about her past.
Not a word.
Oh, wow. Okay, so then Margaret disappears.
Vanishes.
Right, and Louise?
Oh, she's got a story, of
Oh,
course.
okay.
She claims Margaret was attacked by Arthur, her husband with dementia.
Oh, right.
Says he left her disfigured and that Margaret went into hiding to have plastic surgery.
Plastic surgery, okay.
Yeah.
So all the while, Louise is living in the Logan house.
Living the high life.
Spending their money.
Forging checks.
It's like she's repeating this awful pattern.
Isn't it? A chilling echo of her past behavior. I mean, she gets into these situations with vulnerable people, gains their trust, exploits them, and then ultimately silences them.
It's scary. It really makes you think, like, are some people, are they just predisposed to this kind of, this manipulation and violence?
That's a good question, a really big question, What makes someone act this way over and over again?
Yeah, it's disturbing for sure. And then, to make matters worse, Arthur dies in a mental hospital.
Oh, wow.
And Louise, she donates his body to science.
Donates his
To
body.
science, yeah.
Almost as if she's trying to, you know, erase any trace of him,
Right.
to completely remove them from the story.
Like she's trying to control the narrative.
Exactly. Manipulating perception. That seems to be a big part of who she is.
Yeah, I think you're right. But eventually her facade crumbles, right? She gets caught forging checks.
Uh-huh.
The police, they search the Logan home.
Uh,
They discover Margaret Logan's body buried in the backyard under a fig tree.
oh my gosh. A grim discovery that finally, brings her whole reign of deception to an end.
Yeah, and even though she tries to blame Arthur,
Of course.
the evidence, it's too much.
Overwhelming.
Tragic, really. And to top it all off, her husband, Lee Borden Judson, commits suicide.
He does.
Yeah.
Wow. Can't cope with the revelation, huh?
Nope.
And the stigma.
All of it.
It's just another layer of tragedy in this whole awful story.
It is, yeah. So Louise is convicted of Margaret Logan's murder
Of course.
and sentenced to death.
Wow.
On April 11, 1947, she becomes the second woman in California history to be executed in the gas chamber.
It's just incredible to me, throughout her trials, even facing execution, she insisted she was innocent.
Yeah.
I mean, was it a delusion, or was she so desperate to hold on to some last bit of dignity?
Or did she really believe she was above the law?
Yeah, it's a question that stays with you,
It does. It really does. So looking back on Louise Peete's life, I mean, what can we learn from this deep dive?
I think her story really gives us, a peek into that dark side of human nature.
Uh-huh.
The deception, the manipulation that some people are capable of. It makes you think about how we decide who to trust,
It does.
And how vulnerable we all are in a way.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to be careful, for sure, but also to remember that even the most ordinary seeming people can have these really dark secrets.
Absolutely. I mean, Louise Peete, with her, privileged upbringing, her carefully crafted personas, she defied expectations and left a lot of damage behind.
Destruction.
Yeah, destruction. And her story, I mean, it just keeps fascinating people, horrifying people. I guess it makes us ask, how can someone live a double life for so long? And what is it that pushes people to do these terrible things? If Louise Peete were alive today, right, with social media, all this instant information, would she still be able to fool people?
The chilling thought.
It really is.
Well, here's Deep Dive. It's been quite a journey. I mean, we've uncovered this captivating, disturbing, really thought-provoking story.
We have.
Thank you for sharing all this research with us.
My pleasure.
Who knows what other deep dives are out there? Keep those sources coming, folks.